You did that surreptitiously.
Did what surreptitiously?
Let me be co-host.
Oh, it
Usually
wasn't
we every
particularly.
time we're like, oh, I gotta let you. Oh, you gotta ask me to be
Yeah,
co-host.
I
And
know.
then you're like, oh yeah, let me do that. This
Yeah,
time I was just
I'm on it.
there.
I'm on it.
Yeah, you're
So
on it
today,
today.
the day of manifestation, just
That's
manifested that.
right.
Um, have you heard of the word whinge? Like the verb to whinge?
Only because of y'all, you UK folks. We
Oh,
don't
really?
use it.
Yeah, I only learned that this week because it came up in one of my groups where we have Americans in the group. They're like, "What does whinge mean?"
Yeah, I
And I
figured
was
it
like,
out
"Oh,
because it's like wine,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Yeah. So I was like, oh, that must be a word they use. But yes, a lot of my clients will say it or write it, and I'm like, "Mitch, okay." I've heard you say it as well, but I don't think
yeah."
I've ever
I probably
stopped you
would.
to ask a question. I mean, I'm surprised we don't have more words for whining
Mm.
because I think we could stand for to use some. Why is it
Why?
related to this topic in a way?
No, no, it's really not. Okay, let's move on. Sometimes when you try and force the whole British American comparison thing, it just doesn't
That's right. It's
land.
got to be organic.
It has. It has. Noted. Okay. I don't know how we get from whinge to eating out unless you're whinging about eating out, but
I'm not. I like eating out now, but the topic today is eating out and the difficulties therein,
yes.
of which people have many.
Let's list off some of the difficulties then.
Okay.
Calories.
Yeah,
Okay, for the benefit of the listener,
go
me and
ahead.
Steph are both just kind of nodding at each other. Calories on menus. Now you name one.
Okay. Like freezing up when it's time to order because of decision fatigue or like fear of making a decision.
Mhm. Comparing what other people are ordering and using that to inform your decision.
Overthinking intuitive eating, like ordering the perfect right thing.
Feeling like you need to restrict during the day because you feel like you're going to eat more than you would if you were having a meal at home.
The actual act of eating in front of other people at the table. And is that what you said? Comparing?
No, 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 no.
Okay.
That was a bit different. Yeah.
Yeah. Just like the vulnerability of eating in front of other people and having other people see you eat.
Becoming anxious or stressed or feeling guilty about the number of times you're eating out in a period of time.
Ooh, Sarah, I threw this episode idea at you right 10 minutes ago, and you're like, you've got a
I'm on
list.
fire today.
You're on fire. I'm running out of things. I'm like, what else do people struggle with? And I know there's people shouting at the radio.
Oh,
My
bless
gosh.
you.
I admittedly do picture people listening to us on the radio in the car. That's interesting. I never realized that. I thought that. Um, Also the healthism about food. So like at least this would have been something I would have paid attention to, like eating out being you don't know what goes in the ingredients that go into the food, so you have less control over that, and you're not, if you're calorie counting or macro counting and these kind of things, the trust issue that comes up, the control issue of eating something you didn't prepare or don't know, exactly what's in, and the food guilt that might come around that.
Yeah, good one. There's something as well about sometimes it's an obligation to eat out. Let's say it's an occasion or something like that. It can feel like you have no sense of choice in this decision to eat out, but you have to do it. You feel like you have to do it for someone else because someone else will be
Yeah.
upset if you don't. That social pressure that you're supposed to do this, I think can bring with it its challenges.
Yeah, another one would be, and then we could actually start talking about them, but like
No, let's just do this for 40 minutes.
just naming the problems.
Yeah.
This was one that used to get me. So I would feel like I was doing well, like I was sort of my food at home felt aligned or in control. And then the invitation to go out somewhere would be like, oh, this is going to mess up. This is going to mess me up. This is going to kind of invite a what the hell kind of feeling, or like it's going to throw off my game. It's going to interrupt my flow.
Mhm.
And then the guilt actually like of that. So feeling like, oh, what's wrong with me that like I can't even go out to dinner because, but it's like this almost this feeling of like I either choose socialization, which I know is good for me, or I choose my own like well-being around food, which I know is also good for me. And these are hard things.
Yeah. And I would be thinking, what's wrong with me? Because there were many occasions where I would have binged before I'd gone out for a meal.
For sure.
I might have been binging all afternoon, and
Yeah.
now I got to go out and have a meal in front of people, and
Yeah.
I feel sick.
Yes, that happened to me Probably 90% of the time. I used to have a real, this is something you alluded to earlier. I used to have a real oh, issue. Like I talked about it in therapy, I remember. Like, what is my problem with knowing I have plans? If I had plans in the evening, it didn't even matter if it was going out to eat or not, but usually it was. I inevitably binged all day. Like I couldn't, there was something about the anticipation of that thing that triggered something in me that would just, I could not wait. Like it was almost like I needed to eat just to get it over with in advance. And then I would binge throughout the day. And by the time I got to dinner, I was totally not hungry. The appetite was gone. And again, I've also thought about that in terms of, sometimes I would cancel. And sometimes I think about, was it a way that that it gave me a reason to cancel? Because if I was so full or so like in despair, then I wasn't going anywhere. So I think at different points in my life, I would use it as almost maybe a subconscious reason to get out of it.
And on the flip side of that, if I was eating out with people, sometimes, a lot of the time, I'd feel safer because I'm thinking, oh, if I'm going to eat with other people, I'm not going to binge. And hopefully by the time I get back, sometimes I certainly have binged after being out for dinner with people.
For sure.
But if it was late enough, I would be able to go straight to bed. And so there was sometimes that relief and also a sense of I could kind of relax because I was less judgmental of, let's say I went out for pizza with friends because everybody's eating pizza. Like it kind of feels okay to eat pizza. I don't have to second guess it. I can go, this is just normal eating because everyone's doing it. So this is normal compared to, I don't know, binging on pizza in the afternoon and things on top of that.
That's like kind of I mean, I could see the holes you could poke in that, but like I never felt that way. I always felt like if other people were eating pizza, somehow I felt like, well, if they weren't, I wouldn't be. Like somehow it was forcing me to eat something that I didn't want to eat. And then I felt like I was being controlled or somehow like I didn't have choice. So it would really bring that up for me. And I think this idea of choice and autonomy, that somehow there's this feeling of if I like eating out somehow takes away your agency. And that would apply to many of the reasons that we just gave. I guess I'm thinking about this and like, well, why doesn't it feel that way anymore? Do these things present in any way for me now? How do we get to a place where those aren't factors? Because I never worked on any of that specifically. I don't think. But they're not. Now I go out to dinner. I go out to dinner not a ton, but I go out relatively frequently. And I don't think about that.
Well, I eat out a lot. There's something for me about eating out that feels like being taken care of. And I really like it.
Nice
and I will eat out on my own. It's Thursday. Last time I ate out was Monday. And I've been working all day Tuesday and Wednesday.
Alone?
Yes, alone on Monday. Yeah, I had to go into town to drop some stuff at the solicitors. So I went in somewhere and I thought, I'm going to sit in and have some lunch. And I was going to do some work, but I forgot my laptop. Oh, well.
Oh, well.
Oh, well. And I find working lunches being a great excuse to get out. And so I think, well, just what you were saying around like that sense of feeling like not being in control or not having a choice. I think when you're in restrict mode, it feels like you're being pushed to eat more than you want to. And then sometimes in binge mode, it can feel like you're being restricted and you have to eat less.
Yeah.
It's interesting to me because it's not one that I personally struggled with, but with clients, and maybe you can relate to this, the idea of, with intuitive eating and getting more in tune with what it is that we want, when you start asking that question, what is it I actually want? Sometimes people do not have a clue.
Yeah,
like they
right.
just don't know. The noise is too loud, or the judgment or anxiety, or they're not connected to their sense of what they really like.
Yeah.
Whereas I think that was a bit easier for me. I don't know why that just wasn't one of my particular hurdles.
That one reminds me of how sometimes the intuitive eating model can get in the way. So if we've got the idea for, first of all, that, because I did receive the question, I received a question that inspired this topic. And the question had read, I'd like to hear more about how to eat around other people. Part of it was about panicking and freezing and hunger cues shutting off. But one of the things she said was, it feels uncomfortable to schedule meals at a certain time when I'm trying to eat more intuitively, right? So there's this idea that in order to be an intuitive eater, we have to know exactly what we want and be completely satisfied. And number two, that we eat only when we're, you know what I mean? Like that it's if you've got dinner reservations at 7 p.m., that somehow that's not intuitive, because what if I'm hungry at 6, or what if which I want to speak about, or what if I'm not hungry at that time? And so one of the ways potentially that this has changed for me is the perfectionism around those ideas. Like, it's okay if you don't know exactly what you want. I think that that's part of the exploration of this process, is what even jumps out at you off the menu. And even if that thing is still a safe choice, I think there's a lot of exploration that we can do eating out to figure all this stuff out. And if you eat at a different time than you're hungry, that's called practical eating. That's in our lives. We're not going to always eat exactly when we're hungry. And it's just, that's not going to happen. So that's something to learn to tolerate. And I think that idea of controlling those variables is still an extension of control in general. It's not a perfectionist thing. I certainly go out to dinner at times, because I'm an early, I could eat dinner at 5 o'clock. Well, that's changing, but I'm an earlier dinner person. So sometimes when I go out to dinner with friends, the reservations are 7:30. That's probably about as late as I would eat. And oftentimes I get hungry at 5:30 or 6. It used to be that I would just have something then, because I needed to do that, or I would inspire urgency. And that was fine. Like, I kind of learned, like, okay, then I have a snack before I go or something like that. It's best not to push my hunger past its limits. And that was how I coped for a while. Now I find that I don't need to do that. My body doesn't overreact. I can wait. And then I enjoy my meal a lot because I'm really hungry for it. But it doesn't have to be the case where it's like, oh, this is an imperfect situation. It's just kind of working around it. The flexibility itself is probably the merit of it. You know what I mean? Like, being able to be more flexible is part of recovery.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm similar to you. When people book a table for 8 p.m., I'm like,
yeah, I know.
We're not going to be eating till 8:30, maybe even 9 o'clock potentially.
Yeah.
And but again, it's more like a minor irritation for me now. I don't know that, I mean, to be fair, I don't think that it was ever more than that to begin with, because I mean, I used to binge until late, but I would always prefer, I actually phoned up only today to book a table for Saturday evening, and I asked to book it for 7. I mean, if it was up to me, it would be 6, but there's a couple of other people coming. I said 7, and they said, oh, we've only got one at 7:30. And I was even like, oh man,
I know.
just
I would
that
be
extra half
like, new restaurant.
But I think what you speak to there, because I remember even in the early days of us doing the podcast, you were saying, hey, if I'm hungry, I've got to eat something, because you talked about that feeling of urgency. And just in the time I've known you, as time's gone on, that has reduced. Long-time listeners might be able to appreciate that.
Yeah, that's really cool. That's really cool. And I'm sure that things are still going to evolve. But it's almost like maybe a strategy here would be to look at the thing that we're identifying as the problem, i.e., I'm not going to be able to choose the right thing, or I'm not going to be able to eat at the time that my body really wants to. Look at that as the growth edge, right? So, like, how do I let that thing be okay? Like, how do I let that be imperfect? And like, kind of using it as an opportunity to work on that, right? Yeah. Work on not eating all the time exactly when we're hungry, of choosing, you could potentially get to the restaurant and choose the wrong thing, quote unquote. That's okay. What do we learn from that? I remember in the beginning of recovery, I went out, and every single time I went to a restaurant, I ordered the most decadent thing on the menu, because it was like, this is what I'm doing. That's the permission I have now. And so it was a very purposeful, like, yes, I'm going to have those things. And sometimes it wasn't even what I actually wanted, but that's okay. Like, that's how you sort of figure that out, because until you offer yourself things, I mean, oftentimes I was sitting more on the side of restriction going out, and I would always order the salad every single time. Now, I still really like salads, but I always thought, oh, I want the X, Y, or Z, because that's the most decadent thing. And it was almost like this energy around it, like, because I couldn't have it, that's what I wanted. And then when I actually had some of those things, I was like, this is kind of a buzzkill. Like, it's not actually as fantastic as I was imagining that it was. But you learn that through doing that. And so now I have eventually coming around to a place of being able to say, okay, like, I know what, like, I've ordered this sort of thing or that sort of thing. And I kind of feel like I am more closely identified with what I want and how I want to feel by going through them all. and sort of trying out different types of things and different types of restaurants. Because I certainly wouldn't have gone to like, I don't know. I would always want to eat at a more of like an American pub kind of restaurant because they had salads, right? Going to like Indian food or Italian, like I wouldn't want to go there because the options would have been more calorie dense. But now I realize I actually don't like going to Italian restaurants.
Mm.
I think just because like my mom makes it better. So I'm always disappointed when I go typically to Italian restaurants. But I would have thought that was like the end all be all before. I would have thought like that's what I would really want if I could have anything. And actually it's not. It's just that was what I had judgment around. Removing the judgment, then you have more room to be like, do I like this or not? Is this something I actually want?
And during this time, were you navigating calories on menus in most places or not?
When I was recovering?
Yeah, at this time when you're ordering the most, your word,
No, we
decadent
don't
thing on your
have
menu.
that like you do.
Mm-hmm.
No, that was not on menus at that
Yeah,
time. And even here now, it's not a requirement, although I'm seeing it sometimes
yeah,
for sure. It's there, but it's not. You guys have a requirement, right?
yeah. I appreciate you can't know for sure, but do you have any idea how that might have impacted you at that early point in your recovery, eating out and being
Yeah.
confronted by the caloric numbers?
So I'm sure that there's multiple ways that would have impacted me, but I will say this. I remember thinking this at that time, and I still think it. It's it it's interesting how in the back of our minds, it's almost like this automatic, if it's higher calorie, it's worse or it's scarier. And what I was figuring out at the time in recovery, I was like, when I eat higher calorie things, I stay fuller. Because at that time it was like, if I wanted 3 lunches, I had 3 lunches. I just ate as much food as my heart desired in the beginning of recovery. And I was finding that the more high calorie things I was eating, I might need 2 lunches then instead of 3. And so it was kind of like, there's this bias that higher calorie is worse, but actually higher calorie is more satisfying. And
Mhm.
that occurred to me really early. So I almost think I would like to think that if I'd seen the calories, yes, I think I would have had an automatic, just because it's the language I knew, like, oh no, can't have that. But then I think I would have overridden that because that's what I was doing at the time of like, yeah, but that might actually sustain you.
Mhm.
And then you're not going to be needing the second one or you know what I mean? Like you're not going to go home and still need to eat, which I would have allowed myself to do, but maybe I wouldn't have even needed to because it would have been more filling and more satisfying. So that the benefit of higher calorie options, I think it's an under talked about thing. And I still think about it. Sometimes I'm like, I want the higher calorie thing because I'm not going to get to eat again until X time and I want to be full.
So that's interesting because there's a chain of them here called the Lounges, and they do these Turkish eggs as this breakfast thing in a skillet, and they come with bread, and it's this rich tomato sauce, and I really, really enjoy it, and I find it really satisfying and really filling. But then I saw on the menu the number of calories in it, and it was much lower than I thought it would be. And my initial reaction was like, oh no, because I normally
Yeah.
have this as a brunch. So it's
Right.
normally like breakfast and lunch. That's normally like 2 meals in one at a weekend or something like that. And I suddenly had this, well, that's not going to keep me going. And it was really interesting watching that play out. I felt a little bit disappointed. I felt a little bit like I was being robbed of something because
Yeah.
the
Yeah. Yeah.
calories were so much lower than I thought they were going to be.
I think that perspective is we need to talk we need to think about it more. But I'm also not going to pretend that like let's say that I'm going out to eat because there's sometimes during the year where I find that every weekend I've got because I'm not somebody who typically goes out every weekend, but there's some times where I am. And when that happens and I'm eating out more and more and eating the highest calorie option on the menu every time, I would think about it. Like it wouldn't be something I'm like, whatever, I'm an intuitive eater. Never like I admit that I would probably consider it like, okay, am I getting over full here, considering that I've eaten my normal meals throughout the day as I normally do. And this would be twice that, for example. And if I'm doing that on a regular basis, am I chronically overfilling? I don't think that having an awareness has to be a deal breaker. I don't want to pretend that, like, oh no, I just never think about that. That never crosses my mind. That's misleading. So, does it cross my mind? Yes, but it becomes okay. There's then like, that's, do I really, if I want this dish, I want this dish. It's also like, there's an awareness of it.
Mhm.
And that can coincide with still ordering it. but it's
Yeah.
not like I'm completely like, whatever, that
Yeah.
I'm
But it's
aware.
interesting like how the calorie content can do that. It's the calorie content that's prompting you to ask the question, am I
Yeah.
getting over full?
Yeah.
Whereas if the calorie
Right.
information wasn't there, that question may very well not arise.
Which is how it's like why it's distracting. This is interesting. I'm curious about how this conversation actually would fold into the argument to be made about eating out the palatability, quote unquote, of those foods. And I think that would be an argument I would have put out there. Like at a time in my life, would have said yes, but when you eat out, the foods are higher palatability. That's bypassing your ability to tune into what your body's actually feeling and what it's not, because it's
Mm.
just appealing too much to your taste buds.
Well, it was just so the thought that came into my mind is before I even struggled with food, I didn't struggle with food at all until I was 26. I wasn't that food oriented. I just didn't think about food a lot. I enjoyed food, but I didn't really, it just didn't take up any headspace. And I
Mm.
was in a slim body. But if I went on holiday for a week, I would come back and I would see I'd gained a couple of pounds. And at that time, because I didn't think about food or weight, there was nothing to be done. It was just like, okay, I gained a couple of pounds on holiday. And I wouldn't even think about it because I might weigh myself every couple of months or something like that, just out of a curiosity thing. And then it would just naturally come down because there was no overthinking. So there was that adjustment. And I think that can happen in a lovely way when you don't have all the food noise going on in your head.
Yeah.
Once the food noise starts is when it starts to get a little bit
Yeah.
complicated. But I guess a lot of us get into certain routines with food that allow us to feel, I mean, if we're in a okay place with food, that allow us to feel kind of balanced and regulated with food. So when we're thrown out of those routines and we might be eating more for whatever environmental or social reason, that is then going to have an impact. And that I think often when we just fall back into our own patterns, that regulation just the body regulates it out. If everything is working in the way it needs to work. But as soon as I got to a place where, oh, I notice I've gained weight and now I want to try and eat less to do something about that, that
Mm.
messed everything up.
Yeah. Yeah.
Everything. It's where it all began.
And it's still like, it's like, that's where the risk of, we've talked about this in many episodes, of attaching to these things becomes vulnerable. And then that takes on a different light. Then yes, the ability to sort of regulate, whether that's psychologically or physiologically, gets compromised because there's then other factors coming in of stress, guilt, and dysregulation that take away our ability to be intuitive, I guess, for lack of a better word. And that's, I guess, sometimes people might think, well, I'm not at a place of regulation, so these things matter. So that example might be true for someone who's saying, look, I'm not regulated. And so if I don't pay attention to choices that involve calories or even just safe foods, then I'm going to quickly become dysregulated. Like that's just going to happen. And then I'm going to end up in a worse spot. So I've got a client I can think of right now who would say, I'd rather order the safe thing because if I don't, I'm going to end up binging for a whole weekend because of what it will do to my psychology. So in that case, like what's the better option? Like, do I stay with what's safe in order to prevent further unraveling, or do I challenge myself here and order the scary thing, even at the risk of that turning into, kind of a what the hell binge mode? And I think, well, I could ask you how you would respond to that, and I could also offer my thoughts.
Well, the hyper focus on those things for some people might make their eating more disordered. So if they go out, they order the safe thing, they don't order the thing they really wanted, maybe that's the thing that causes them to binge. And then
Yeah.
to someone else, going away from the safe thing or the thing they think they should order is the very thing that triggers a binge as well. With any of these things, and like you were saying, even you being able to, I guess, have some calorie information that just makes you ask a question, just makes me go, let me just check in with myself about this because
Mhm.
that information is just prompting me to do that. You can do that now without the hyper focus, without the over attachment to that in a much more, again, like a regulated way.
Yeah.
But I think that you are right. There's not going to be a one size fits all for everybody, depending on where you are at in your stage in recovery. It might not be with where you are with food that it's even possible or beneficial for you at this stage
Yeah.
to go out and go, I'm going to order whatever the hell I want, because your psychology might not be in the safe place for that.
Right.
You'd already got to the point where you were like, right, this is it. I'm all in. You were
Right.
overriding. You were able to talk to yourself about it. All of that was safe enough in your own mind. Whereas someone else might hear it and go, I'm going to do what Steph does, but they haven't
Yeah.
psychologically and emotionally prepared themselves for it.
That's a soundbite I wish I could play all the time, because I've had people say to me, but I listened to the podcast and I know you did this, and then trying to emulate that. And the difference is exactly that. Again, I was at a place where I was very on board with the whole thing. And there wasn't doubt for me about this. I mean, there was fear, but there wasn't doubt about this being what I needed to do. And if that's not there, and that's not a moral thing, that doesn't mean I was better. It just is where I was at that point. Ordering the thing that's scary didn't dysregulate me in the way that it might somebody else. And then you're tripping your wires over into like an overactivated place. You're going outside of your window of tolerance, so to speak. Whereas I was stretching my window of tolerance, but I could do that. If you feel like you're someone who, if you do that, you're going to become so dysregulated that you then sort of lose your center and can't quite get it back for days and days. I don't think it's the smartest thing to do. And I think that that's sometimes overlooked in social media, like intuitive eating, anti-diet recommendations. And of course, I'm the first one to say nothing is a blanket statement for everybody. And so what's speaking to somebody isn't speaking to everybody. But there is kind of this idea of just order whatever you want. And that is so helpful for so many people. And it's not for others, where doing that is going to compromise the integrity of this entire journey, at least for a period of time, and then further reinforce, this is too much for me. This is too scary. I can't do this. So I think there's nuance to the strategy, and there isn't a way of saying like, yes, just go to the restaurant, order exactly what it is that you want. I think you have to know yourself, and you have to know like, what's within my capacity, today. And how is this going to land for me tomorrow? And what's that going to do? And how do I stay in that doesn't mean we always need to stay on the safest side of everything, because then we'll also never grow and we'll never get anywhere. Challenge is important. Stretching into a challenged place is, I think, important. But where your challenge place is going to be different, for each person.
Last weekend, I went out for a not Christmas. We're not recording them that far in advance. I went out for a summer social with a load of the local therapists, most of whom I don't know very well, a handful of them I know quite well. And we were in this bar. The area was like street food. And so we'd all had to prepay, and we all were ordering pizza. So there was no option for anything else. It was pizza. And when the pizzas arrived, mine arrived way before everyone else's. I think because I had the calzone. So, and it's proper like Italian pizza. So it's very thin crust and it's getting cold. So I just did the whole, does anyone mind if I start? And I just started. And then I noticed some other people having theirs, and they were waiting for everybody. And I felt some self-consciousness about that I'd started. And then I also noticed, I think there was about 12 of us. I think I was the only person who finished my pizza.
Oh, yeah.
And I had a little moment where I was like, oh, no one else finished their pizza. And I had just a slight flush of like, oh, what does that mean? And I checked in with myself. How do I feel having eaten my whole pizza? Would I have made a different choice? And I was like, no, I feel good. That feels like
good,
the amount of food that I wanted. But I felt that. And I don't very often feel much self-consciousness in that kind of aspect. But I did on that occasion, probably because there was 12 of us and I was the only one who finished.
I like what you did with it, though. I think there's a difference between being self-conscious about something and observing something. That's then something I notice, but I'm not sitting here berating myself about. Whereas I think, for sure, in the past, that would have been a note of comparison. And it might be helpful to take this conversation to the place of how eating out intersects with social comparison and pressure.
Mm-hmm.
But just to name that, like I feel like that line of self-reflection is like a script of, being able to not let the self-consciousness take you for a ride. It's like you pause and you're like, you noticed it. And then you're like, okay, let me inquire about that. Like, do I feel guilty? Is there something I missed here? Or is this aligned? And then you're like, no, it's aligned. Great. And then, then it changes, I think, from, even if you carry some self-consciousness about what other people might think, it's no longer the burden of your personal self-conscious of like, I did something wrong. It's kind of like, well, I don't think I didn't, I feel like what I did was right. I'm kind of concerned about what other people might think of me because they're looking at me and they might not understand or may have judgment. But I know that I ate in a way that feels aligned for me. I think there's a difference in self-consciousness that is both personal and social.
Yeah, because I had the thought as well. I wonder if anybody's noticed and had a thought about that. Because they
Yeah.
all know I'm the binge eating therapist.
Yeah.
And so there's a moment when I think that. And then my mind just goes like, I'll never know. And that's most of the time because there's a difference between I'm not somebody who I don't think I really worry about what people think. That's not to mean I don't care about what people think,
Yeah.
which is a bit different. So
Yeah.
worrying is it's more like I'm scared of what I think they might think. Whereas caring what someone thinks is more like if I know I've upset somebody or if I know somebody disapproves of this and it's very explicit, I'm not going to be completely indifferent to that. Like I'm going to have a
Yeah.
reaction to that. And that I think is where I try and check myself of just kind of being okay with the uncertainty of it as well. I just thought it was surprising that, yeah, 11 out of 12 people
Yeah. I think that's
finished.
why I said,
That seemed
wow, because I'm
unusual.
surprised too.
Yeah. And that's why I noticed, because a lot of the time I don't think I really notice much about whether people have finished or anything like that. I think it was when they were clearing the plates away was when I noticed. I didn't notice straight away.
You have to have a certain amount of self-esteem. I think it's self-esteem to not care or not worry about what people think.
Well, my theory is a lot more along the lines of what's the early experiences of being judged. So, and we've spoken about this before. I don't have experiences as a kid of being judged what I ate. I just didn't have that.
Yeah.
So therefore, that coding, that programming that everyone's judging what you eat is just not there.
What about other things? Like, because I do find that people who care or worry about what people think about what they eat generally are also people who worry about what people think about them
Yeah,
at large.
yeah, that's a good point. I mean, I would like people to like me, but I'm okay with not knowing. I think there'll be people out there who have thoughts about me that aren't very nice thoughts and whatever, but I'll never know. So I don't tend to worry about things I can never know.
Hmm.
Maybe
Yeah.
maybe that's almost like part of this
Great.
passivity we've spoken about before. It's like, "No, I'm never going to find out anyway. So what's the point?"
Well, it's the opposite of anxious because if you're anxious, then you're vigilant about what could be,
Yeah,
and you feel like you could control that, and that's why you need to know about it.
yeah,
Where if you don't have that element in you, then you're like, what am I going to do anyway?
yeah.
So
But I don't know how I would create content or put myself out there and make myself visible if I had that.
yeah,
I don't know how people do that. Oh, I think a lot of people get paralyzed. How much
totally.
do you think you worry about it? I don't
So
see much of it
I'm
in you.
sitting here thinking about it. I'm like, I used to care inordinately. Absolutely, I cared and worried about what people thought about me. But clearly, like, there's been progress on that front because it's with food. I think it's actually easier with food than with other things because that is such a place where I feel like I have I have excavated the the thoughts around that and I reject them. So it's like if you judge what I'm eating, I don't care because I know that I have so thoroughly looked at this and I'm doing what's right for me and that matters to me more than anything else. So on that particular front, I've flipped. I mean, I have where self-consciousness would have existed in great measure, it exists not at all
Mhm.
because I'm very sure about that. But if you're talking about something else, I will worry more about what you think of me than that. Like I have more of that. I don't have as much as I used to, but I have more.
Is there any particular areas where that's more, you don't have to say this on the podcast or even tell me, but like particular areas where there's more self-consciousness?
Yeah. Um, the introversion stuff. I
Mm.
whenever I meet people, it takes me so long to like I observe for a long period of time, and I mean not just minutes, but maybe over several times of meeting people. Like I just stand back, and during that time, I feel very self conscious about the way I'm presenting. So I feel like, oh, they think I'm boring. They think I am dull. They think I'm. Oh, I've also had the feedback that I once, did I tell this story before? When I was in OT training, we had to go, I had an OT that took me around and I was like training with her. And she said to me at the review, she said, I can't remember the way she said it because I just remember that she said it and I flooded. Like I was so triggered. And she said, like, you look you look like you're really bored. Like she kind of said something like, you know, it's been noted that you look like you're bored. And I was looking back, I'm like, I get it. I know why. Because when I'm taking something in and like studying something, I get very serious. And I think I have a little bit of a resting serious face. Um, but I'm totally invested. Like, but I do it on the podcast. If you look at the YouTube videos,
that's why I was laughing.
Yeah, like I'll be like,
I was like, yeah.
And I look back and I edit them. I'm like, Stefanie, smile. You know, like, but just because I wasn't feeling the way it looks. But I remember that comment really bothering me because it was being misunderstood. I felt like it was kind of like that's not what's happening. So when I feel like the way that I feel is not a representation of the way that I look, that's interesting. Body image didn't even come across my mind, but that's relevant. That bothers me. And so that will make me feel a little bit more worried because I feel like I have to correct it. I feel like I have to say, like, you're perceiving something in me that isn't true. And I'm very aware that that's happening, but there's no way for me to do that. I'm not going to like be like, by the way, everybody, I'm just an introvert and I'm just taking you all in and in about 3 times later, we'll talk. You know, like I can't do this. But in that time, it's kind of like, well, this is how I am. But I feel uncomfortable in that place.
Yeah. So my self-consciousness is very highest, I think, in dating. That's where my self-consciousness comes in.
Well, you don't have to go any further. You are safe here.
Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah. Your face when you looked at the time.
I had more to say.
Yeah.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
We talked about potential. Should we say it out loud?
Say it out loud. I mean, that's what podcasts are for.
We were talking about potentially shortening this episode, which I'm always for, but now I actually have more to say. It just goes to show.
Yeah. Do you want to add something you want to say?
I was just like, no, I was going to kind of go into like,
oh, don't tease them with what you're going to go into.
Well,
then
more of
like,
the social element of like freezing up around other people, feeling, you know, just sort of exploring more of that judgment piece and things like that. But take homes.
Oh, take homes. I was wondering what you were saying then. I thought you were going,
take home messages.
Take home messages. Oh, that's pressure.
I know it is. That's why I gave it to you.
When we first suggested this topic, we were thinking, is there actually a whole episode on this? And then, of course, we've started recording and there's so many avenues that we could go in. So if there is an avenue we did not go down, send us a message and we'll see if we can turn that into an episode as well. Because we get to the end of these episodes, we're like, there's so much more we can say. And when I'm editing it back, I was like, oh, there's so much more I can say there. We've always got more to say.
That's exactly what I was just going to say as well. Yeah. And I feel like given that we're at we're over 160 episodes. So I feel like these little nuances are worth, you know, and we've covered so many broad topics that these nuances they're good fodder for us to have to create content with, because sometimes we're like, what about this? Oh, we've done that before. Oh, what about that? Oh, we've done that before. So new ideas welcome.
Yeah.
Find us on Instagram and join our community.
Yeah. Why not?
Why not? There's a whole load of good things. We are not good salesmen. Those people. Yeah. Okay. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.